This is Nick Redding, and you're listening to PreserveCast, a podcast with a worldwide listenership that explores the broad world of preservation from every angle, from drones to mudlarking and everything in between. Now, let's get preserving. After a year of supply chain shortages and pressures on agriculture, many have come to question the future of our globalized food network. It's why conversations like this one, where we dive deep into the history and future of agriculture, are so critical. Preservation isn't just about buildings, it can also help us understand the food we eat and the future of that which sustains us. The topic of this week's PreserveCast, as we dive into the world of heritage wheat with Claus Kropp. This is Nick Redding, and you're listening to PreserveCast, and today we're excited to be speaking with another friend far across the pond, coming to us from Germany, Claus Kropp, who is, in his official role, is the manager of the Lorisham Laboratory for Experimental Archaeology. And we're going to be talking about the work that he's doing on the Year on the Field project, which is a global effort, and we'll be talking all about that and looking at the history of wheat and what can be done with that crop and what we can learn from a global effort. But before we dive into that, Claus, we love to get to know people, know their background a little bit. So tell us about where you grew up and how you ended up in this line of work. What inspired you to do the kind of work that you do today?
Yeah, sure, gladly. Basically, I was born and raised in the beautiful city of Heidelberg in southern Germany. Many Americans might know this city from the picturesque and romantic castle ruins, but many also might know it from the fact that it used to be the headquarters of the United States Army of Europe. So to some point, there were more than 20,000 American soldiers stationed there. This is where I grew up, and my decision to study history and archaeology, basically in Heidelberg, can be, traced back to my youth, I guess. I was about 16 when I started to get increasingly interested in historical events and also in family history. And it was this connection of having a major historical event and my family in between and in these historical events that made history alive to me. And this is when I started, spending a lot of my time in the public library, reading and learning about both history and archaeology. And I also was hiking a lot in the forests of Heidelberg, exploring historical monuments and there. And this is why I studied this field of work, because I wanted to learn about our past to understand our present and even our future a little bit better. And when I think about my interest in agriculture, which is a component we need to think of when we think about the Year on the Field project, it is my family roots in this case. My grandfather had a dairy farm in Wisconsin, and whenever I was in the States in winter, I helped him for a couple of weeks, and I did that, a series of 5 or 6 years in a row. And when I was studying in Heidelberg, I also started working on a dairy farm in Germany and started keeping my own livestock. So I was completing my bundle of interests, maybe when I was about 20 to 25, I guess.
And what was your first job in the field? And then we'll talk a little bit about what you professionally do today and then move to the project. But what was your actual first job in the field after your education?
My first job after graduation was actually at the Department of History at the University of Heidelberg. I started there in the management level. I was doing teaching there too, but then switched after 1 year to the chair of medieval history. I was an assistant professor there, and this is where I basically was able to continue my passion in teaching, academic teaching, and outreach, and also my research interests in medieval history and especially rural medieval history.
And today, you tell us a little bit about the laboratory that you manage and the kind of work that's done there and what that is a function of. Is it a function of a university, or tell us a little bit about where you work today?
The Lauersum Laboratory for Experimental Archaeology has a weird name. I admit that, but it is part actually of the so-called UNESCO World Heritage Site Lorsch Abbey. It's a early medieval memorial site, or a monastic site. It used to be one of the most powerful Carolingian, meaning early medieval monastic sites in whole Europe. And the big problem there is that today, after 1,200 years of existence, well, nothing much of it is still there anymore. There are a few extraordinary remaining buildings, like the so-called King's Hall, the best preserved building of that era north of the Alps. But when people came here in the past, they always had the problem of getting that image of a complete monastery or a monastic site in their head when they saw only these few ruins, and it was all really abstract. And it was in 2008, and I was already working there, besides my work on that dairy farm as a tour guide here at the World Heritage Site. And it was back then that people weren't necessarily only interested in monastic culture, but also everyday culture and the manorial system, and how the duties of the servants had to go down, about medieval crafts. And these were all things that necessarily weren't really possible to answer there. And this was the birth idea of that open air laboratory. And it was during the crisis of 2009, when there was a investment program started, and we were actually able to build a scale one-to-one model of an early medieval manorial site, consisting out of many different buildings, being the buildings where the fictional lord might have lived like, but also the servants, including agricultural fields, craftsman shops, gardens, meadows, and even livestock. And all of this based, well, on all the existing possible sources we're able to collect, meaning both historical sources, archaeological sources, iconographic sources, ethnographic sources. And one of my main research interests there today is the field of medieval agriculture. And we combined it with our public education program, where about 20,000 people every year visit that open air laboratory to look the researchers over their shoulder and learn about that early medieval life.
So here in the States, I think a lot of times we refer to this almost as like, we call it like living history or an open air museum. Is that sort of to paint a picture for people who are interested in maybe even want to come travel when it's safe to do that again? And it seems like it's perhaps getting safer. Is that the closest way of describing what they would find there? Sort of like an open air museum experience?
It is, in a way. I mean, that's a time period which doesn't has the same preservation level as when you think about colonial Williamsburg or other living history sites in the States. And what we also try to focus on mainly on that site is research. So we try to open the door in the past through research, and giving people the chance to watch these researchers over their shoulders, actually feeling that they're, well, part of that process of learning more about the past. So it's not, we also have living history elements on one side, but there's also the modernly closed researcher walking on site and telling people something about the growth status of field crops with the weather station he's just working with.
Interesting. It's a fascinating sort of model. So out of this work, is that where the Year in the Field project grows? Is that what inspired it? And then maybe tell us, kind of the background of it, and then what is the goal of this project?
As with many ideas and resulting projects, it's really hard to think back when it all started. But I think you're right. Through our own research work on medieval agriculture, the way we document every single aspect of what we're doing, like plowing with a reconstructed early medieval plow, we tried ourselves in understanding these past ways of farming. And through my work in several associations, international associations like EMA, LFEM, or XARC, I have also understood deeply the importance of historical knowledge and the understanding of traditional handicraft techniques that are not only interesting when we look at the past, but are also be of great value when we look into present day challenges in terms of sustainability and climate change. And so the idea was born to bring together as many museums, farmers, but also living history farms and archaeological open air museums around the world, as many as possible, to join forces and document the cultivation and processing of one particular field crop. And in this case, in the first year, we chose wheat. So we tried to bring people together to, get into conversation with each other, to learn from each other, and also to inform the public about, basically the appreciation of food.
And
so
by doing this,
idea.
And by doing it on a global scale, is there a level of information that you're hoping to gather and get that you wouldn't be able to do if it was just at your laboratory?
Exactly. I mean, when you look at, you have that same field crop on one hand, but of course, it's a different variety of wheat in every region. It might be a modern day wheat variety at that organic farm we have on the project, but we also will have some heritage seeds from a really, really old variety at one living history site. The interesting thing is that we have basically the same processes in place. We have to cultivate it, we have to harvest it, we have to process it, but every single institution, farmer, site brings in its own traditional techniques, its own way of doing it, and also its own way of coping with challenges which come along the way, be it climate change or many, many other challenges we face. So it broadens the horizon in a way that you stand there in awe and say, wow, this is a great resource to learn this on a global level.
And are there specific sort of research questions that you're asking that non-wheat growers would understand? I mean, are you curious about how it handles higher temperatures, or are you what specifically are you hoping to find in the process?
There is one specific aspect of the project which I have to mention in this respect. It is the preservation of skills that is of great importance there. When I think about using draft animals, for example, this is something which is of rising value again when we think about organic farming, regenerative agriculture. But in many regions of the world, the knowledge of actually the right use of draft animals, be it horses or cattle, oxen, whatever, is already lost. So we have this great opportunity to create a database of knowledge to both preserve and even maybe train people in these crafts again. And when we think about what this project brings for non-wheat growers, it is something that relates to the process of actually producing food. I mean, we're so much off when it comes to the understanding of how our food gets on the table, that we have with this project and our public outreach, the chance to tell people the story of how in different regions of the world, in different time periods, people cultivate what it means actually, the cultivation of wheat, how we would process it, what products we can make out of it. And with this process comes value of food. This is really something that it's really important to me to teach people again that this is not something which we think about. Well, will I spend my money for another DVD, or will I have something good to eat? We should cherish and value our food way more than we do usually, because it became so cheap. And if you understand all the process and work behind that production of the food, you might value it a little bit different.
Yeah, and I think that you have or we collectively have like a moment to capture that interest in that we all just lived through a pandemic and all across the world in different ways. And I don't know exactly what it was like in Germany, but I can speak from experience here in the United States is that, there were moments when we couldn't get all the types of food that we were very familiar with, or we would go into the grocery store and it would be cleared out and all the meat was gone, or there were no eggs. I remember for a while, personally, our family, we found a little sort of craft farmer who was selling eggs, and we went there because that was the only place we really could get eggs. And I think that we kind of realized the unsustainability of our modern farming systems and the supply chains and how, we're dependent on, Peruvian apples and, strange sort of supply chain systems. So I think people are very interested in this idea of how can they live a little bit closer and understand, at least, even if they're not doing it, the food that they eat. And I think that's why it's sort of appealing. And I'm curious if that's sort of a similar situation in Germany.
Yeah, basically, you can say that's as the pandemic is a global phenomenon. I mean, it's not only the sense of family and sticking together, helping others that was in different light during the last 2 years, but also when I even think about our family, I mean, especially when the pandemic started in the first couple of months when we were in total lockdown, we were so happy not only to have ourselves. Back then we had 3 children, now we have 4, and we still had our own private farming operation, and we spent so many time together out there. We're able to grow our own food, and this is the phenomenon we were watching with other families as well, and even trading stuff from each other was really interesting. And this is something. Well, maybe one of the few things that can be a positive aspect of what we're all going through right now, that the perspectives change and we see the value of more circular economy, where food is more locally or regional produced, where the person who is growing the food, which is growing the food, and you in selling or buying the stuff from this person, well, you eventually directly see the result, maybe a smile or a happy farmer, and this is of great value.
So let's take a quick break here, come back and talk to us about the actual nuts and bolts of growing wheat and how even amateurs perhaps could get involved or at least be aware of a project like this, and we'll do that right here on PreserveCast. Historic preservation can't happen without skilled tradespeople to perform the work. And there's a critical need right now for those tradespeople. The Campaign for Historic Trades, powered by Preservation Maryland, is working to meet that need by strengthening apprenticeship opportunities within historic trades. In partnership with the National Park Service's Historic Preservation Training Center and Conservation Legacy, the campaign is currently recruiting for NPS Traditional Trades Apprenticeship Program, or TTAP. TTAP's an intensive 20-week apprenticeship that provides young adults the chance to learn historic trade skills while working on America's most iconic historic sites. Multiple positions are open for the 2022 season at national parks across the country. Visit historictrades.org for more information on TTAP and how to apply today. This is Nick Redding. You're listening to PreserveCast. Before we took our break, we were talking with Klaus Kropp about his work both professionally and also as a part of this global effort called A Year on the Field, where groups and organizations and individuals and farmers all across the globe are banding together to grow wheat for a season and see what they can learn and then perhaps do it again and again. Talk to us about the process of growing wheat. Is it a super challenging crop to get into? Talk to us about what it would involve, and perhaps we'll go from there as to how others who don't consider themselves professionals could even be engaged in this effort.
I mean, farming in general is a process influenced by many factors. And when I started farming, I realized for the first time how much we were still exposed to external conditions, extreme weather, or ultimately the climate change, even. So when we take our own wheat cultivation area here at the openair laboratory, for example, we had a quite mild winter this year, and we had a real lack of snow. And a big challenge with young field crops as wheat is that if it stays unprotected in that young age during winter, it is also unprotected from wild birds, wild geese, for example, or when it's as warm as it is right now, also the pressure of wild weeds can be quite high. So to a certain extent, it can always be kind of a Russian roulette here until we finally have that delicious bread in our hands and we can finally say, and this is something I really learned in the past, that man, this bread really tastes good when you have all these different steps and know that one hail can destroy everything, basically. So this is something everybody growing wheat on a global scale has in common, that you're well, still just human, and you can put in artificial fertilizer, but when hail comes or a storm comes, that can all end quite quickly. So this is another factor of valuing if you actually make it to the processing of what you cultivated. I think that's the core of the challenges you face when it comes to wheat or field crops in general.
And how is it generally planted? Does it go in? I mean, I think a lot of like sort of amateur gardeners think of, tomato gardening or cucumbers, and they go and plop them in the spring. How does it actually get planted? And is there a way for people who are sort of amateurs to get involved in this effort?
I mean, actually, when it comes to crops like oat or rye or wheat, it's not that hard to cultivate. Basically, what you have to do is to prepare your ground, your soil on a farming scale that would be using, for example, a plow to turn the land and then a harrow to crumble it a little bit more down to get your seedbed ready. And then you can, use machinery, but you can also hand sow your wheat seeds and harrow them in, or use a different tool to get it in the ground. And then basically you wait and watch and see it grow, and you have to wait until the right time when the seeds are really ready to be harvested. And then again, it's a matter of scale. You can do this by hand, but also in big machines. The threshing has to be done in a way, and the cleaning of the harvest. But then you're almost there, and you can start baking your bed. And I mean, even if you're not a farmer and don't have a big garden where you have a big plot, it's still worth to try it out. Even in a flower pot, you can grow wheat. If you want to experience that life cycle of that field crop and to see, you have that one seed, and when you harvest it, you have 10. That can be a value-added chain. And we were lucky enough to have the chance to gain experience in doing this kind of a project with school groups and kindergarten groups here in the municipality. And we only had a small plot, 2 to 2 meters in size, which isn't really big. But the kids were in it from the beginning to the end because it was their little field and it was their harvest and their bread, and they were proud as hell to bring their little bread piece home and tell mom that they actually did that whole cultivation cycle.
So, which is a great argument for everybody trying their hand at this. If people want to learn more about what you uncover in the process, or somebody is listening and is like, well, I only have a little garden in my backyard, but I want to try this out. From my understanding, you have to start wheat in the fall, right? I mean, I guess it depends on the type of wheat, but or is that a misnomer? Are there wheats that can grow any time of the year?
Well, you're absolutely right. Most of the wheat varieties are sown in fall, but there's also spring or summer wheat, as we would call it, but it's not as common. The good thing is that when you plant it in fall, you have the advantages that on one hand, the wheat will still germinate at low temperatures and start growing, while many of the seeds or wild seeds, weeds won't during the winter. So the wheat is already a couple of steps further in the game than the elements you don't want on your field or on your garden plot. So most of the times it's planted in fall.
And if people are interested in learning about this effort or the types of wheats and the varieties, is that information available, and is that all on your website?
Yes. What we try to have a strong public outreach program with this project. So what we created as sort of a headquarter is actually the project website here in the field. And we then have a project blog, which will every week tell the story of how in rural Kentucky the wheat was sowed or the soil prepared. But then at the same time, we look at that farmer in rural India to see how he did it or she did it. And we also combine this. It's not only the growing process we document and have blog posts on, but also we have guest contributors, and we even had a great post about gluten intolerance, for example, or the importance of wheat for the global well-being of people when it comes to growing food. So we try to follow this in a holistic approach, and we have the website, the blog, and we also use social media in every respect. We have an Instagram account, a Facebook account, and the website can also be seen as a database. We have tag words, and you can basically research the website to some specific aspect. So you look at that specific plow or that specific wheat variety. We will invest a little bit more research and time to get a real database going. So even in 10 years, when the project is hopefully still running, we will have the possibility to look back in that first year and see what different techniques, skills, and so on were preserved. And finally, we also plan to publish this in a book project in the next couple of years.
And I should have asked, but is this year one, year two? What are we? We're recording this right now in February of 2022. How far along in the project are you?
It's the first cultivation cycle. We started the project last fall. Most of the growers, as we call them, planted their wheat in October. Some of them in November, and others don't even started with it. We have a farmer in Colombia that will, because he's in a really high altitude in the Andean mountains, he can only start growing it in April. So he's still waiting, but we're still in that first cultivation cycle.
So we'll have to bring you back and see how everything went and find out how your Heidelbergen wheat fared without the snowpack, and
Exactly.
if you're able to get any bread out of it, which we hope for your 4 children that there's a lot of hungry mouths to feed there, Klaus. So what's next for you? You've obviously got your work cut out for this project. Is that really the focus right now? And where can people kind of catch up with you and learn about your travails with this specific project? Is there a way to follow you?
Well, if anybody wants to follow what I do, basically with the work in experimental archaeology, as the Lowesome Laboratory for Experimental Archaeology also has a website. We even have a YouTube channel where we try to tell people about the techniques and ways of early medieval agriculture, but also other fields of house building and indoor climate analysis. I'm also an active ox driver, both professionally and on my private farming operation. So this is a field of work where I can be seen too. When we think about the project itself, we're still in the process of figuring out what field crop we will choose for the next cultivation cycle. So it's open for discussion. Everybody can suggest a field crop. We chose wheat because it was so widely spread, and we could include really a lot of people. We have more than 20 growers from 4 continents being part of the project now. But that can change or add on when we choose a more specific field crop for next year. So for now, we just hope that we actually bring home that wheat at the end of the cultivation cycle. That's one immediate goal for the future.
Fantastic. And before we go, we ask this of everyone. It normally makes people kind of squirm in their seat. But what's your favorite historic place or site?
Oh, that's a tough one. Being an archaeologist and historian, that's really tough. But wrapping my head around it, I would have to say that is the King's Chapel, King's College Chapel at the University of Cambridge. In England, I was able to visit that college chapel twice. It was built in the 15th century, and it has a really breathtaking Gothic fan vault that always makes me stand there in pure awe, thinking about how somebody being human can create something so beautiful. And that would be my pick, I guess.
I think that's a good one. I don't think a lot of people would argue with that one. And we'll have to have you back maybe in a year or so and see how everything has gone over the past year and learn more about this great project. We'll put links to your website and the Year on the Field website and Twitter and all that good stuff in the show notes so people can just click on those. Thanks so much for joining us today, Claus. It's been really fun.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to PreserveCast. To dig deeper into this episode's story, head over to preservecast.org for show notes and our collection of previous episodes. Don't forget to engage with this podcast by subscribing, commenting, and leaving a review. Follow along on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at PreserveCast for even more. PreserveCast is currently recorded in Walkersville, Maryland, and sponsored by the 1772 Foundation and powered by Preservation Maryland. Thanks for listening, and keep on preserving.